Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and welcome to my review of Final Fantasy XV, played on the PlayStation 4 Pro. I bought the collector's edition of the game with my own money. This review is not sponsored or endorsed in any way. First up, if you'd like a little more background on the game, please do check out my preview video, which you can find a link to in the description or on screen here. This review will be largely spoiler-free, featuring gameplay of the open world, and no story cutscenes and no major story details. That out of the way, let's get started. I think the best way to sum up Final Fantasy XV would be to say, it is a game of two halves. On the one hand, we have the open world aspect, a large space with which we can run around exploring, gathering treasure. Items, collectibles, weapons, crafting materials, and so forth. You'll find dozens of side quests to complete, at least 80 that I know of, along with far more quests known as hunts where you track down and slay a specific monster. The other half of the game is the story-driven aspect, which at times might clash with the open world aspect, and the last third of the story takes place out of the open world in a linear series of maps. Duality is very much the theme with this game. Right off the bat, I will say that I currently have over 70 hours put into Final Fantasy XV, and I'm going to be putting more into it too. I enjoy Final Fantasy XV, I think it's a good game, but also a troubling one in some ways. When it works great, but there are so many small issues here and there that it really feels like they ran out of time when working on the game. It was definitely a mistake to announce the game in 2006, considering it didn't even start development properly until 2012. There are times when playing the game I could flat out tell they clearly intended something different or something more here. The DLC hooks are extremely obvious. They might as well say, look forwards for the DLC which will explain what happened here. Does it feel like an incomplete game? Yes. But there's still a lot of game here. But let's break it down into several categories and go into more detail. Combat gameplay, open world gameplay, story and presentation are the rough categories here. To start with the combat gameplay then, and once again if you'd like more detail please do check out my earlier preview. The combat of Final Fantasy XV is very love it or hate it in my opinion, and it all depends on how you play it. Primarily this is an action RPG. It's not turn-based like many of the other Final Fantasy games have been. You move around in real time, you see an enemy, you run over, and you smack it. No random encounters in the classic sense of the term. But you will run into random encounters in that enemies may instantly spawn by dropping in from the sky or popping out of a hole, and so forth. The combat is extremely simple, easy to get into, and whilst not hard to master, there is some nuance there. Effectively you have an attack button and a defend button. You can hold them down to have the game semi-autopilot for you, yet well-timed dodging or attacks are rewarded and there are parts of the game that can be fairly tricky. You can input directions to change your attacks too. For example, if you hold back whilst attacking with the spear, you will jump back and do a long-range thrusting attack. If you hold left, you will do a series of sweeps. Your party members will generally do what they want, but you can also command them to do special attacks that expend a meter that builds automatically through combat. And some of these are incredibly powerful. Gladio's impulse technique, for example, will hit for max damage on every enemy within range. Ignis and his overwhelm technique likewise delivers a lot of pain. The other parts of combat are the more magical elements. Noctis is able to warp, which can be used to reposition, escape to a vantage point, to instantly close the distance to an enemy, and so forth. Noctis also has his royal arms, spectral weapons that only he can use, and they act like a super meter. Once the super meter is full, you can activate Armiger, and once Armiger has been engaged, you effectively become ultimate for a short period, and can also unleash a devastating team finisher attack. Magic spells like Faraga are now crafted grenades. Find magical energy in the world, turn it into a grenade, or combine it with items to create spells with various effects. For example, combine some fire energy with a potion and you will make a Faraga spell that also heals you. Late into the game you will also obtain a ring that allows you to cast some more traditional Final Fantasy spells. Death, Holy, and a gravity-like spell called Alterna, or something along the lines of that. Melee is definitely the main focus here though. There's a decent selection of weapons, but you might be disappointed at how many individual weapons you'll find in each category. If you're the type of person who likes to use dozens of different weapons and wants to find a new upgrade every few minutes, like Borderlands or Diablo, yeah, you might be disappointed. You can upgrade several weapons to keep them relevant for the entire course of the game. Indeed, the very first weapon you use, the starting sword, can be upgraded to become basically one of the most powerful weapons. And personally, I like that. The combat can be very hit and miss though. The biggest objective complaint that can be raised against it is the camera. When fighting large enemies, the camera doesn't seem to know what to do with itself, and if a bush or a rock impedes your vision, you're going to have to adjust the camera, which can be finicky when locked on, because when you lock on, you have to hold R1 to lock onto an enemy, and then keep the lock on by pressing R3, because if you let go of R1, you lose the lock on. The game really should allow you to toggle lock on with R1, that would be very smart, but for some inexplicable reason it's not there. I hope they patch it in. Alternatively, objects that obscure the camera should turn transparent. The camera can be frustrating, but once you learn to deal with it, you'll be alright. All in all, it makes it so the game isn't so bad to play, but trying to watch it can be incredibly confusing. You're probably going to see in this video moments where it's like, what is going on? And whilst playing, I could kind of figure it out, but whilst you're watching, it's going to look very strange. All in all, I think the combat is fine. Just don't go in expecting character action levels of depth, and play it the way it wants you to play it. Don't try and play it like you would play Dark Souls or Bayonetta or something. The open world gameplay is rather basic, and your enjoyment will rely almost entirely on your immersion factor. Final Fantasy XV offers a high level of atmosphere to immerse you in the world, if you ask me. Some of the locations are a little sparse, but the atmosphere has really... they nailed it. If you enjoy the world, if you enjoy the atmosphere, you'll be happy to explore and drive about the world. Speaking of, your primary methods of travel are car and chocobo. The car is faster than the chocobo, but must stick to roads and dirt paths. The chocobo, meanwhile, can go almost anywhere. The open world is entirely open, in the sense that you can walk from one end to the other without any loading screens. You can't swim, you can't climb up mountains and stuff, but there are no loading screens in the open world, even when you go into towns or go from interior to exterior. Although you will probably notice, as I did, the one major town in the open world part of the game has a very long tunnel leading to it, which is kind of serving like a loading screen, but it's a clever way to go about it, I suppose. Kind of like those elevators in Mass Effect. God, remember those? But I enjoy the game's atmosphere, so much so that I think I've used fast travel twice in 70 plus hours. Sometimes it's nice to take a break from the game for a few minutes whilst the characters are driving. You know, check my emails and stuff. Once you've cleared the story, you gain access to a flying vehicle, but I don't find myself using it too much unless I need to get from one side of the map to the other, and I don't want the fast travel, as landing it can be a little tricky and a fudge landing leads to death, unfortunately. There is plenty to find in the open world though. There is treasure absolutely everywhere, and sometimes it's actually pretty good treasure. I found a very good weapon early on in the game, and that's always nice, you know. But let's move on to the story. This will be a tricky segment to speak on without spoiling anything, but I'll do my best. The game's story meanders some. There's 15 chapters in the game. Chapters 1 through 8 are open world. Chapters 9 through 15, or rather 9 through 14, are all linear. Chapter 15 is post-game content, where it goes back to open world. Chapters 9 through 14 will go by so fast that you won't believe it. Effectively, once you reach chapter 9, you leave the open world behind and you head to a new continent, where you are set on a linear path in smaller maps instead of open world areas. Have you played Final Fantasy XIII? Remember how near the end of the game you reach Grand Pulse and it opens up? Imagine that, but in reverse. only the open world here is way better than Final Fantasy XIII's open world, whereas Final Fantasy XIII's linear sections were kinda better than 15's linear sections. 15's story is enthralling at best, and frustrating at worst. The world presented to us is fascinating, with just enough hints to get you interested in what's going on. The tale being told to us is quite simple too, as the best are. Effectively, this is a story about a prince reclaiming his kingdom and learning what it means to be a king. There aren't too many convoluted elements so commonly found in JRPGs, and that is a breath of fresh air. But how to touch on the flaws? Let me put it this way, Final Fantasy XV expects us to care about characters that we have no reason to care about. Fundamentally, it makes sense that the characters themselves would care, as they have established prior relations with each other, but we, as the player, do not. The main character's father will show up for less than 5 minutes of screen time during the game, and one of those 5 minutes is a moment that is so dramatic, feels like there is supposed to be so much gravitas behind it, such an impactful moment. We're expected to care a great deal about the relationship between father and son, and this happens with several other characters, yet we never have cause to care because these relationships are not touched on in the game. These are problems easily solved, however. We just need additional cutscenes added to the game. There are not an inordinate amount of cutscenes in Final Fantasy XV to begin with. Whilst I appreciate they have tried to tell us more of the story in a Dark Souls way, you might say, letting us absorb it through exposition found in the world, I don't think it exactly works here. The Dawn trailer for the game feels so crucial to understanding the bond between father and son that I was shocked that none of that footage is in the game. Many of these assets exist, so why are they not in the game? We will only care about characters if we have a reason to care about them. You can't just throw a character at us and 5 minutes later expect us to care about them, just like what Gears of War 4 did. Whilst these flaws cannot be denied, they are easily fixed, and I can only hope they continue to polish the game to smooth out some of these problems. And even as someone who has watched the movie and the anime and just about everything else, it still feels like the relationship is not fleshed out enough. I assumed it was going to be fleshed out in the game via flashbacks, or even just exposition, talking, conversations about it, but it isn't. Other characters seem to have entirely mysterious motivations and payoffs that make no sense, but the developers have stated they plan to improve that in various ways, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. It is very hard to review a game that is effectively unfinished. It is hard to review a game in general these days when you play the game at launch and then 6 months later it can be so much better because of, post-launch support. But as I said earlier, although the game does feel unfinished, there's still a lot of game here. The last third of the game is incredibly rushed, but that didn't spoil it for me. It wasn't terrible, it was just there were holes here and there in the plot. There are some extremely emotional moments near the end, without them feeling too cheesy or ham-fisted. In fact, some of the best moments are in the last third of the game, which makes it all the more perplexing that it feels so rushed. Everything's just going at light speed towards the ending. It really feels like they just focus so much on the open world that they ran out of time. If you've played Type 0, you probably know what to expect from this director in terms of, emotional moments though. The main character and his friends, it is easy to form a connection with them as they feel genuine. They feel like a group of friends, and that's nice. Not many games get that right, but I think Final Fantasy XV has managed it. If only their development had been played just a little better, it would have been great. The story is mixed then, as is most everything with this game. At times it works, in other places it really falls flat thanks to pacing. There's a lot of awesome moments in the game which I want to show in this review, but I can't because it would spoil those awesome moments, which means they wouldn't be as awesome when you get there yourself, you know? It's a dilemma. But at the same time, those awesome moments are what you can sell the game on, rather than just, running around the open world. It's fun to run around the open world, but it's really not all that interesting to watch. And that's why marketing these games must be a nightmare. But the summons and dungeons in 15 all have a little story to them. When it comes to the summons, they've been an important part of Final Fantasy for a very, very long time. And I believe 15 has some of the best the series has to offer. But once again, guess what? It's mixed. They do feel a little rushed in how you acquire some of them. The first one comes a decent way into the game and it feels like a big event. Then you immediately get another one, and then they just kind of pop up at random. Only 2 of them are thoroughly fleshed out. But whilst there aren't a huge number of summons, that doesn't personally bother me. What does bother me is how they are distributed. You're going to be seeing a lot of Rammer, and some of the others are very rarely seen. One, for example, can only be summoned once during the entire game, and that's the only time you'll see that summon, which is a little disappointing, but kind of understandable too. The summons play into the presentation though. Just like every other part of the game, the presentation is mixed. The game offers a stable 30 FPS on PS4, and the devs are also aiming for a 60 FPS mode on Pro, which is good. But the frame pacing is all over the place, meaning, yeah, you're getting 30 FPS, but at times it doesn't really feel that smooth. Lighting is a highlight, and the graphics are amazing here and there. There are a lot of times where it didn't take my breath away, but I just stopped and looked and was like, this game looks so nice, Like with any game, you'll find ugly spots here and there. There is pop-in, there's LOD issues, there's shadow, draw distance and all that sort of stuff. Personally, I don't really tend to notice that too much. The game only buckled for me when I was flying around in post-game content, where you can tell it's really not designed to handle that fast movement. If you fly too fast over towns or military bases, you'll sometimes be subjected to loading screens whilst it loads the assets. I don't think I experienced any crashes or glitches, however, which is quite impressive for an open world game. That's not to say the game is bug-free, but I think seeing no glitches myself in 70 hours is a good sign, especially for an open world game. One thing I've found is that sometimes the game will hang for a long time when saving manually. Like, it feels like the game is crashed, but it's just taking a really long time to save. I can only assume that is to do with how the game is writing a large amount of data to update the file or something. But I think that's about it. Final Fantasy 15 is a very mixed experience, yes, but it's a game I very much enjoyed. A frustrating one, because I want to enjoy it more, and I know I could enjoy it more if there were just some small changes made here and there. Because the majority of my problems with the game can be fixed, which is a good sign. It's not like the game is so fundamentally broken and unentertaining that it would take a major rework to salvage it. If I had to give it a score, I don't know, maybe a 7 out of 10. Add in some costumes, add in some cutscenes to explain some of the major events that happen off screen, adjust the audio mixing here and there, extend or otherwise adjust certain segments in chapters 9 through 15. 13 and 14 in particular. 13 needs to be like 10% of the length it is, 14 needs to be way longer. And for goodness sake, include the assets you've created for the game. The Dawn trailer, there's so much content there, so many cutscenes that aren't in the game. Put it in the game. And in some cases, there's content on the disc that they're not using in the game, like the songs that have been written for the game and would have so much emotional impact in the game, but the only way you can see them is to go into the options and then look at the credits. Oh no, that's not how life works. If these changes were made, if they do a director's cut version of this game, it could easily go up to a 9 out of 10. Oh man, if you have any questions about the game that weren't covered in the video, please do ask down below in the comments. Alright, if you're worried about like New Game Plus or post-game content and DLC, there is lots of post-game content. Once you beat the game, you can continue playing. New Game Plus is coming, apparently. And there's going to be 3 DLCs, I think? 3 story DLCs and an online DLC, and some free DLC, so I guess we'll see how that turns out. But yes, if you have any questions, please do ask in the comments below. If they are spoiler related, like, hey, why did this happen at that point, send me a PM instead, or clearly mark your comment with a spoiler warning so as not to spoil others. Thanks. And thank you for watching too. I hope this was useful or entertaining. Final Fantasy XV is a good game, but it could be so much more with a little extra polish. I only complain because I care, and I want this game. I want every game to be as good as they can be, and this one was incredibly ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. They definitely needed more time. But now, I'll catch you guys later. Take care.
これでいけるんじゃねえか。
封印が解けたようだな。
もうなんか封印って言葉がテンション上がるよね。
面白そうだよな。
ああ、やっぱ言っちゃう感じね。